Hello YouTube, this is Dazza the Cameraman. Today is Monday, September 4th, 2017, New Zealand time. And I'm pleased to have with me here a couple of special guests. We've got Keith from P&K Space Imaging, and we've also got Marc D'Antonio. So welcome along, guys.
Hey, nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
You're welcome. Now, Marc, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, my degree is astronomy, and I've worked professionally in astronomy for a number of years. And within astronomy, my specialty is planets around other stars, exoplanets. I go all over the country talking about them. In fact, I'm going out, is it next week, I think, to Devil's Tower in Wyoming to speak at a conference on exoplanets. And then my actual function is the president of a visual effects company called FX Models, as in special FX, and that's based here in Connecticut. And I have another division out in Arvada, Colorado, and that division creates giant planets to hang in buildings. As such, that's my day job. But what I do in addition is I'm the Mutual UFO Network's chief photo and video analyst, meaning I see stuff from all over the world, endless. In fact, but just before going on with you, I finished another case for another group of people here in the United States and got that written report to them. So I spent a lot of years doing this, and you know, you can people see me because I do these shows, NASA's Unexplained Files, What on Earth. They're British TV crews, but they come here and we tape a season. I just did this past week, I just did a season for What on Earth season 4, the final group of stories for season 4. So within season 4, I've got like almost 30 stories that I've worked on throughout. And you know, I'm this isn't an ego thing for me. It's just getting the truth out and just saying things as they should be spoken, said, not any kind of exaggerations, no patting on the back. I don't play those games. It's like whatever people, want to make of it, they can make of it, So effectively, I try to be within science. I try to be the voice of reason, and that's
right.
That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to be a voice of reason.
That's good. That's what I like to hear, of course. I have my Facebook discussion page, which is called Voices of Reason to Explain X, Vortex.
I'm a member.
Very good. Thank you, Marc. And so you are, in fact, a qualified astronomer. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually got my degree in astronomy back in 1983, probably right before some of your viewers were born. Okay, right. And I've kept current with it, and I'm planning on. I'm in Connecticut right now, but I'm planning on leaving Connecticut at some point and moving to Arizona and taking my observatory with it and putting it under a beautiful dark sky. I've waited all my life for a dark sky. I'm not going to go without one, And then while I'm there, I figure I'm going to get involved in another program for getting, a further degree in planetary science, because that's kind of where I want to skitter around the corner and go into planetary science, because understanding how planets are formed and how the dynamics of a planet operate and like how the atmosphere works and how the spectral readings from a distant star look through an atmosphere, stuff like that. Those are the simple things. Understanding that stuff is sort of crucial to understanding all the other worlds out there, the potential worlds. We know about TRAPPIST-1, which has 7 planets, all within the orbital diameter, say, of Mercury. I mean, that's pretty cool. And we might even have detected water on one of those planets. So that's even cooler. So, understanding how we operate here on Earth, understanding the dynamics of our planet will help us when we actually have to leave this planet, which we will have to. Otherwise, the sun will destroy us when it's out of hydrogen. So.
Right. And of course, that is a very long time away at this point.
At least next week. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Now, Keith, I'm going to turn off my camera just to help my my computer cope here. And I'm going to share in my other screen. I'll just present that to everyone. And we should be seeing in the live feed in a minute. I'll just check, make sure that comes up. P&K Space Imaging. Keith, would you like to give us an introduction about your YouTube channel, please?
Sure, it's pretty simple. Basically, we're concentrating telescopes on local solar system objects, mainly the moon. We do Saturn and we do Jupiter. Our goal, basically, well, it's myself and my friend Paul, who is from Miami, Florida. Now, he's the telescope guy. And we met a couple years back because basically we were doing the exact same thing. We were streaming on YouTube. We were making, moon videos through our telescopes. And we figured out that having two people doing this off of one telescope would be a lot easier with adjusting exposures and brightnesses and, everything you got to do when you want to live zoom where you have to adjust it consistently. So we decided to team up, and that's how P&K came to be. And we're still doing it to this day. So if you want to see the moon up close, you know exactly where to come.
Even I go there. Right. It's a great time.
Now, I see that the channel has over 20,000 subscribers. So you've got some great views on there. And I've sat in on some of your live streams, and certainly some fantastic imagery there of the moon and Saturn and Jupiter. And
absolutely.
Very interesting discussion.
Yeah, Paul is a master at what he does. He just gets better and better and better week by week. He constantly is upgrading his equipment because his goal is he wants the clearest views possible from Earth. And that's the biggest, thing that we get from a lot of people is they can't believe that this is actually coming from Earth, and let alone Miami, which is probably the worst place you want to put a telescope because of all the humidity and stuff constantly. But the guy is just amazing, and he just keeps getting better.
Right. So do check that out, folks. You'll find a link in the description area. We'll post that later if I haven't done so already. I know it's in the promo video already. That's P&K Space Imaging. And this is the YouTube channel of Marc D'Antonio Sky Tour live stream. And again, do check that one out.
Which I didn't even mention, like a dummy.
Yeah, well, go ahead, give it a plug there, Marc.
Well, okay. Now, I blame the fact that I'm streaming these days on Keith and Paul and Bill New York Skywatcher. Those guys were instrumental in convincing me to just start doing a live stream of the night sky. Bill does these wide-angle views of the night sky. They're beautiful. Paul and Keith do exactly what Keith just said. They do planets, they do the moon, and occasionally other objects. Nobody's windows. And I do deep sky objects, which means that my camera is actually very sensitive, and I can actually show very, very faint objects, live. And so I do, and we take lots of photos and then process them. So that's, the observatory is called the John Zach Memorial Observatory, named after my friend John, who passed away. And he was going to be working with me on this project, but in his memory, I named the observatory after him. And the Sky Tour live stream is a clear night stream, moon or no moon, of different objects in the sky. We do double stars. We do stellar nurseries, where stars are being born. We do planetary nebulae, which are the, dying stars and so forth. So we see all kinds of amazing objects in the evening sky, and then we talk about them. I share with them. I talk about where stars come from, etc. So it's really, really great, fun and informative stream, I think. But that's just me.
Okay, very good. Well, let's launch into now the main point of this Hangout was to discuss recent video that you commented under, Marc, and I'll just pull that up in the window there. And this is a video by Nibiru Planet X News, which was published on August 27th, 2017. And it's called Physicist Report, the Pink Star in Our Sky. And Marc made a comment underneath this video, and it should be right at the top here, based on my view here. And as I scroll down looking for your comment, guess what? It's disappeared.
Has it?
I believe so. Yep, I'm all the way down, and there are no more comments to see there. But all is not lost, folks. All is not lost. So what has happened here is apparently because Marc has actually used some real science, of course his comment has been deleted, and no doubt Marc has probably been blocked as well. So we can't actually see.
That's a good question. I should try and go back there and see.
Yeah. But anyway, it's okay because we have it archived. Good old archive IS, and here it is. Physicist report, the pink star in our sky, published August 27th, 2017. And let me scroll down, and there is the comment by Sky Tour live stream with Marc D'Antonio. And let me see if I can just zoom up on that so it's easier to see. And we can see the comments there. So, Marc, would you can you see that on the screen? Are you able to read what you wrote? I think you've got that on your other.
I do. I have a copy of it too. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to leave that up. I'm going to pull a chat over here on the side as well, so people can keep an eye on the chat while we're at it.
Okay.
And if you can just read out what you wrote, and then we'll discuss that further.
Yeah, I mean, people can read it. I won't read it word for word, but I will. I'll summarize. When I watched this video, this quote unquote physicist report, my first thought after watching the video was, who is this person calling themselves a physicist? Because what they were saying was, in my view, and actually in science's view, incorrect. In fact, it wasn't just borderline correct, maybe incorrect, depending on your interpretation. It was outright wrong, and that's the problem. I don't often, I don't often take stuff like this on, but when you see stuff that is so outrageous being passed as totally valid, I just couldn't sit still. So, for instance, basically, she said that there was pink light in the sky, and that was because the star, literally she said, our sun does not produce green light. What? I mean, I said in the comment, anyone who has a diffraction grating, that is a simple, very, very thin line acetate, which you can buy at Edmund Scientific, which is available worldwide for $3 or $4. You hold it up to the sun and you see a spectrum of the sun. What's a spectrum? It's the light, the white light from the sun broken out into red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Notice I said green. There's a problem. When you look in the sky, you see the sun, okay? And when you, obviously when on a clear day, and you see that it looks like it's white, a little yellow. Now, there's a reason it looks a little bit yellow in our sky, and that is because the light coming to us from the sun is energetic. And the molecules in our atmosphere, which are very, very, very tiny, okay, a lot smaller than the wavelength of the light hitting them, the molecules in our atmosphere will absorb some of this light and reflect the light back, all of it, okay, and that's called scattering. But certain elements of certain regions of the spectrum are reflected back and scattered in a more of a primary fashion, meaning that most of the light being reflected back in all directions, every direction, is blue. So that's why the sky is blue. Simple. And then at sunset, when you're looking through more light across the curve of the earth, you're looking through more light, more of the blue light is scattered. And the light looks red because more of the blue is scattered. Now, we also see that blue light with the reddish light, okay? And because the red is very, very prominent, it easily shows up as a pink sky or a pink clouds. And in fact, it's not just pink. We see purples, we see pinks, we don't see greens, okay, but we do see a lot of other colors mixed in there, okay, in various hues, various depths of color. Now, one of the problems that I saw that she discussed is that she claimed that there was no green light coming from the sun. Well, I basically said in my comment that apparently is now removed, without green light, then we wouldn't be able to see white clouds. And this is simple physics here, because If you excuse the green light from the spectrum, then all you're going to get is this other color, a magenta or purpley, light. And that's what you'd see the clouds looking like all the time. Why do we see them as white? See, that's something that this physicist didn't account for. That's something different. White light shows up because white light's hitting them. Now, how do we know that? Because analysis of the water molecules, the H2O water vapor molecules in these clouds, shows that when white light hits them, because the molecules of water vapor are much larger than the wavelengths of the light hitting them, they take all of the light coming to them and reflect it back. They don't selectively scatter one color or the other. They scatter all of it. So when you look at clouds from any direction, they look white. Now, that, of course, when you have denser cloud, it looks a shade of white, as in gray, okay? And they never look black, okay? That they can't. Black is absence of light. So they only look gray or a darker gray, all right? That type of scattering is called Mie scattering, M-I-E, Mie scattering. That's something that clouds do, and that sort of breaks her, it immediately contradicts anything she says about there being no green light in the spectrum, because red light, green light, and blue light sum to white light. Red light and blue light do not. But clouds couldn't be white, ever, in her scenario. And as a physicist, that's something you should know. And she doesn't. So
just to interject there, Mark, I can remember when I was a young teenager taking apart an old pair of binoculars, and inside the binoculars you've got a pair of glass prisms, and I remember playing with those prisms, and if you wet the bottom of the prism, it would actually stick onto the glass on the window, and it produced a lovely spectrum on the back wall of my bedroom. And so there you've got the white light splitting the light into the various colors of the spectrum, including green, of course. Yeah, and that's true. And now I think part of the reason that someone who doesn't have any knowledge of light can get confused about light and say there's no green light coming from the sun, that's a cherry picking thing, because in astronomy, one of the things we notice is that there are no green stars primarily, okay? They may look green to your eye because of the way the cones work in your eye, the color receptors in your eye are called cones, right? It depends how those actually are functioning. They might interpret the light a little bit differently. We have people that are colorblind. We have people that are hue blind. We have people that see color differently. That's what we are. We're all like that. We all have our own selective sensor, basically. Well, anyway, we don't see green stars. And that might make people think, well, there's no green light from these spectra. But that's not true. That actually has to do with something called black body radiation, which I won't get into. But the black body radiation curve is an ideal radiating heated body. What does the radiation look like coming off of that? You get, if it's very hot, you get the high frequencies, and then they taper off to the lower frequencies. Now, green is in there, but it's going to be sandwiched over between the red side and the blue side, and it ends up being a narrow slot that can easily be lost to the eye. Okay, so this is something that someone who doesn't understand light might take and say, well, there's no green light, and here's why. And by the way, the proof is, look at the stars. There's no green stars. And it's like, that is absolutely incorrect. And I go back to the simplest observation. We can't have white clouds without white light hitting them because of the way clouds scatter the light that hits them. It's that simple. So I don't actually feel that she was speaking from a position of authority on this. And I think she's actually cherry picking data that fits her narrative, but isn't actually true.
So the bottom line to this is, when you hear this stuff, you have to think about doing your own research. You have to think about consulting those who have, and you have to pursue the option for disagreeing with someone like this. And I said, in fact, I even asked you before we started the stream. I said, why don't you get this woman on, and we'll ask her about her ideas without being confrontational, because I don't like doing that. You don't like doing that. You want to be respectful of people that take the time to submit to questioning. You want to make sure you're respectful. And I would never call her any bad names. I don't do that. That's not me. I mean, I just want to get to the bottom of what her understanding is. And if her understanding is flawed, which I believe it is, then in a very nice way, I would say, well, I respectfully submit that perhaps light doesn't operate in the way you think it does. Because all I want you to do is explain white clouds, and then hear what comes next. Follow?
Right. Now, just on that, of course, I'm very happy to set up a respectful discussion between you and Claudia, if she is willing. I would be very surprised if Scott Cohn would ever allow it to happen, because he's a very controlling person.
What is she?
However, if he in some ways,
I hate to say
it seems
that way. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
No,
in some ways,
it seems that way. Yeah.
That way, but yeah. And but I mean, if she is willing, then I would certainly invite her to come and join a live hangout for a respectful discussion with no name calling. I always undertake to be polite and respectful, especially when somebody is prepared to meet me halfway. I will always respect them for that.
And that's fair enough. They have that respect. They have that respect coming if they're willing to do that. I agree with you.
Now, I actually think it's with your comment, because I did post the archive copy of your comment on a couple of my Facebook pages that I'm involved in, and I do think it's actually worth. So, if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly read off some of this, because you make some great points in that, and that's the feedback that I've had from people.
Okay.
So, are you happy with that, Mark?
No, I'm fine with it. That's okay.
Yep. So Mark has stated here, Claudia Elbers is embarrassingly uneducated. She has fundamental holes in her knowledge. She says that pink light can only occur if the sun emits red and blue light and not green. She claims that the sun doesn't emit green light. Has this pretend physicist ever looked at the sun with the diffraction grating? I see green every day of the week. She is also absolutely hopelessly wrong and has no understanding of what Rayleigh scattering is, which is the reason for sunset and sunrise colors, as well as a reason for blue sky. She actually claims that we don't notice the blue coming through because the sky is blue anyway. Wait, what? She uses Rayleigh scattering, and it's clear and it's obvious result to suggest that it isn't happening at all. Now, I hope I've emphasized that correctly. Further, it is clear that she has no understanding of camera artifacts, camera sensors, and the color casts of different sensors impart to images. For instance, magenta is often and commonly cast in photos. That is why Photoshop has a magenta correcting channel. Also, magenta shows up all the time in nighttime imagery as well, and depending on your sensor, must be color corrected. I know, I take nighttime imagery every clear night and see the magenta cast. It isn't really there. Last I checked, the sun isn't out at night. Good point, Mark. Yeah, the sun isn't out at night to cast that. The camera sensor simply is more sensitive to that end of the spectrum, and it imparts a color cast as most sensors do. Note that I said the images are taken at night, no sun.
For the nighttime photos, yeah.
Yeah. In the image artifacts that are tinged magenta, can you guess what color many camera high transmission coatings are colored? Yeah, I've seen that on the lenses and so on. If you say magenta, then ding, 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 you win. Look at the face of your camera lens. It will appear blue or magenta if coated with said coatings. This is yet another source for photos that appear to have magenta tinges. And again, a very good point there, Mark, because a lot of the lens flare images that people are mistaking for Nibiru, you see that the red kachina or the blue kachina, as they call it, and this is nothing more than the result of lens flares and the color
internal lens reflections.
Yeah. Sorry, you've got internal lens reflections, and you've also got the lens flares, and they're typically pink or blue because of their coating on the lens.
Right.
So, carrying on, the inside of our planet is warming up, and the evidence is none. There is none. Did you hear me? No evidence of interior warming. So the magma is getting hotter, eh? Does she understand melting points and intrinsic properties of rock? Clearly not. Just because someone says they have a PhD and authoritatively tells you things doesn't mean they are correct. This Elbers person is exactly one of those. She is woefully unprepared to make the assessment she is foisting off on you, and her factual basis for her theories is entirely founded on wrong assumptions and information. This woman is a disgrace to academia. Now, there's some pretty strong comments in there, Mark, but I do think that they're justified based on what we have been hearing from her. And I reiterate that if she is willing to come on and join us for a respectful discussion, we will be absolutely respectful. There will be no name calling and no talking over her. She will absolutely be given a chance to explain and respond and ask questions of us as well. So there is an invitation to Dr. Claudia Elbers. If you'd like to join us for a hangout, you're most welcome.
And I'll just add that for my language that seems a little harsh, I would be happy to offer her my apology for the harshness of my tone and say, we'll take it back a step and we'll approach this from a more discussionary tone, something that can actually be where we can actually achieve something at the end rather than say harsh tones. I was harsh, there's no doubt, and I felt at the time and still feel that if you're going to speak pseudoscience, then you better be able to offer empirical data, experimental data, and other data to prove your points. That's the problem with pseudoscience. Now, I believe, and I didn't even go into the brown dwarf theories that she talks about, but she believes that there's brown dwarfs in our system. Now, a brown dwarf is a object that's kind of like Jupiter, but 80 times bigger. Okay, it's a star's precursor before it gathers enough mass, enough additional gas to start fusion in its core. Now, fusion requires many, many millions of degrees to start. And the pressure from all the overlying atmosphere on a star pushes down on its center and it really heats up the interior. If it doesn't quite get to fusion capable temperatures, it won't happen. These are the stars or the pseudo stars we call brown dwarfs. They're real. We see them around other stars in the exoplanet arena. Okay, we see them circling other stars as well. We see them in binary star systems. We see them sitting all alone in space. The problem is brown dwarfs have to be 80 times, minimally 80 times the mass of the planet Jupiter, which is, last I checked, the largest planet in our solar system. So if it has to be 80 times the mass, that means it's going to have a significantly higher gravitational field. And if that's the case, then I suspect that we would notice gravitational effects and what were called perturbations, changes to the orbits of the existing planets based on the existence of said brown dwarfs. We haven't seen any of that. We have seen perturbations to Neptune and Pluto that until recently were not explained properly or fully. And these perturbations are actually due to objects out in the Kuiper belt. That's Kuiper, K-U-I-P-E-R. It's the region beyond 30 astronomical units and out to about 50, which has the additional objects that orbit the sun out there, that some of which are massive objects. And we've identified some massive objects out there that could be responsible for the perturbations to Neptune's orbit and Pluto's orbit that have been seen but never fully explained. So Kuiper belt objects is where, if you were going to have a brown dwarf, it would be out there. However, at the mass required, we're nowhere near the mass required for the perturbations we see to Neptune and Pluto. And we would see the perturbations to Neptune and Pluto if an object out there was 80 times Jupiter's mass, because the objects out there that we see seem to indicate that we only have another object out there about the size of the Earth. Get that? The size of the Earth is about what we have out there. There's an object as large potentially as the Earth out there. We don't have anything out there that's, you know, the size of Jupiter. We would have seen that gravitational perturbation, and we don't. I mean, it's
right now.
This is fact now. This is factual experimental result.
Right. Now, the claim that she has been making, of course, is that there are, in fact, a number of brown dwarfs next to the sun. Yeah. And they've been providing images from, for example, the Hangout Space Telescope, which turned out to be spots on the image sensor. And every time we check the position of these supposed brown dwarfs, we find that they haven't changed position one bit, which of course would be impossible. But now we've just had the total solar eclipse across the middle of the USA on the 21st of August. And what effects would you expect the brown dwarfs would have had on the timing and all the predictions around that solar eclipse if there had been brown dwarfs within our solar system?
Well, first of all the eclipse predictions were based on the fact that we have the sun and the other planets in our solar system affecting the sun. Okay, the sun, doesn't affect itself in that regard, so to speak. Although it's a large distended object, and so gravity is differential here and there on the sun, perhaps because of different densities or whatever. But still, essentially, it's the same. So the other planets have an effect on the sun, and the effect we would expect to see if there was a brown dwarf out there that we didn't see is, first of all, that we would somehow had to have missed it with the Spitzer Space Telescope, which has done an infrared study of the entire sky, and somehow that brown dwarf wasn't seen. And infrared energy is basically heat, and we would have seen that. We didn't see that. So what does that mean? That means that for all intents and purposes, we didn't see anything out there, so there was nothing out there, not at least emitting in the infrared. But then again, a brown dwarf would in fact emit in the infrared. Okay, that's the nature of brown dwarfs. So by definition, a brown dwarf would be literally very, very bright. All right, it would be brighter than Mercury's sunward face in terms of infrared energy. Okay, it'd be brighter than that. Okay, not mist. So unfortunately, we didn't get any of that. And had there been special strange perturbations to the sun that had been unknown to this point, we would have seen them. Because a brown dwarf being 80 times bigger than Jupiter will cause something else. I'm going to back away a little as I show you. When we talk about a brown dwarf, we're talking about the sun here, and we're talking about a brown dwarf, say, that's orbiting the sun. But that's not how that works. It doesn't work like this, where the brown dwarf just orbits the sun. I'll do it this way to make it more obvious. What's actually...
I just need to stop my screen share there for you, Mark, because I'm presenting the other screen. So let me just
do
that.
Thanks. I thought people were seeing my video at the bottom.
No, that's just us. So I'll present you to everyone.
Thanks.
There we go. Okay, so your demonstration.
Yeah, I don't see it yet. Am I supposed to see it?
Yeah, you're live now.
Okay, but I don't see my screen changing. But I'm assuming that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as
like
long as you're seeing it, that's all that matters. If this is the sun sitting out there in space, and we have this supposed brown dwarf going around it like this, guess what happens? The brown dwarf is at least 80 times as massive as the planet Jupiter. So what's going to happen is the sun's going to get pulled toward it a little bit too. And the sun and the brown dwarf will actually orbit each other. So the sun, if we take away the brown dwarf, is going to do this in space. It's going to move as the brown dwarf goes around it, okay? That's what we'd see. And that common rotation center, the axis around which they rotate together, is called the barycenter. We don't see barycentric motion with the sun. We see that the sun is perturbed by all the planets in our solar system. And when we look at astrometric, it's called astrometry, which is the measuring of positions of stars, the position of the sun for several decades shows a very specific movement that we can map out and have mapped out. I show it in my presentations when I go around the country talking on this. And not on just Nibiru, where I talk about exoplanets. But those astrometry shows us the position of the sun over the last few decades. And it makes a predictable movement that's based on all the other planets orbiting the sun, tugging on it just a little bit, pulling it this way. The biggest component to that movement is Jupiter because of its mass. So, Jupiter moves the sun primarily, but that's all accounted for. The motion is accounted for. There is nothing else out there that's pulling on the sun that we've ever seen. Now, in a few million years, there is a star that will be passing through our solar system, perhaps. It's one of the Gliese catalog stars. And who knows? Maybe by then there'll be a problem in our solar system. Maybe that could cause a problem. But it's not a brown dwarf. It's actually a regular star. So I don't think we need to worry about that at this point. We just need to get off this planet anyway and colonize and go out to other places. And to do that, we have to dispense with pseudoscience. We have to actually focus on the real science, the real knowns, and stop promoting stuff just to get clicks or just to get income from YouTube. Okay, that stuff has to come to an end. And we're still probably 50 years away from that. So I'm sure there's much more pseudoscience to come. But guess what? I'll be out there fighting it. Keith, who's listening quietly in the background, will be out there fighting it.
Actually, I got a question for
Dazza,
you, Mark. If
and I'll say Dazza will be out there fighting it as well. So
if it's all right, Dave.
Yeah, go right
ahead. The question I have for you is for somebody that, let's say somebody comes up to you and just says, let's just say for anybody believing in a Nibiru or a Nibiru is close or they're capturing in a camera, what are your main bullet points to disprove it? What would you say to them outright when presented with their quote unquote evidence? Kind of like the evidence that you have seen from some of these YouTube channels. What would be your reaction to that, and what would you tell them?
Okay, well, I can give you my arguments based on a case like that I just did 2 days ago. You can tell from that the frequency at which I see these. Somebody took photos of a solar eclipse, and there were all these little planets that looked like little crescents. They're really pretty, and it looked beautiful. It looked like a piece of art. Now, I knew what they were when I looked at them, and I just had to set about proving it. See, what happens is whenever you point the camera at the sun, there's inside a camera lens, there are things called baffles. They're little black rings that are they're a little bit stopped down, a little smaller than the diameter of the actual lens. And they actually act as a baffle for stray light that may come in and get reflected back and forth and might actually make, say, an extra spot on the sensor that you don't want. Well, sometimes if you're looking straight at the sun, that light is so bright that you get these ghostly images anyway, no matter what you do. And this particular person, who was a very, very experienced photographer and was also, by the way, very, very skeptical herself, okay, that what she took was actually Nibiru and all these other planets. I said to her, when you have a very bright light source and you point your camera at it, you're going to get these objects. If you don't believe me, turn on a bright light, aim your camera at it, move the camera around a little bit, and take lots and lots of pictures. When you review the pictures, you'll see Nibiru in your own living room, okay? And that's just one thing. So aiming a camera at a light source is always a bad idea. Won't hurt the camera. but it will provide you with plenty of false information that you might misinterpret if you don't have that background. Now, that's one thing, okay? Aiming a light at a bright light, aiming a camera at a bright light. The other thing is discussing gravitational perturbation, that is the micro movements caused by gravitational fields of other objects, okay? We don't have any totally, truly unaccounted for gravitational interactions in our solar system. So what that means is that Nibiru, this planet, which is supposedly messing with our tectonic system, causing earthquakes, and messing with our weather, and changing our magnetic field, okay, is somehow influencing us without doing so through its gravity, because we can't see its gravity anywhere we look. It's nowhere to be found. So what does that mean? It means that we now have to dispense with real science and go to a science-free regime. Science-free people can make up the rules as they see fit and just make anything work because they just choose to say that's how it works. Then they don't have to justify it with any kind of science. They can just say, this is how it works because I say so. Okay, or I believe this is how it works. But wait, don't you want to know the facts? But first, and as Stanton Friedman, famous guy who I like and admire very much, good friend, he would say, don't bother me with the facts, my mind's already made up. Okay, he made that line famous, and I reuse it here, obviously with his permission. But so aiming a camera at the sun always gives you additional planetary objects you can see. And to prove that, all you have to do is say, point it at the sun again and take pictures, but move the camera a little bit in between, as I had someone do, and then send me photos. The photos I got showed a bright spot that was moving in the view for each photo. And because this person was so, and this is not the person, the photographer person, okay, she was perfectly happy with my explanation. But because this other person was so steeped and so close-minded about Nibiru being real, the person actually said to me, I can't believe it. I'm moving Nibiru with my mind. No lie. How do you fight that?
Wow. Yeah. There's some people that you just can't reason with. You know, it's just too far down the rabbit hole.
I said to this person, I said, wow, you're right. You're moving Nibiru with your mind. Well, hey, have a good day. What can you do? Physics doesn't matter to them. They don't understand it. Nothing matters to them. They can't understand it. They don't want to understand it. Key. Anyway, so that's part of it, Keith. And I don't know, unaccounted for gravity.
Could it be that they don't understand it, they don't want to understand it, or it's not good for their revenue stream?
There you go. Right. That was the clickies. Yeah, it's not good for their revenue stream too. Now, those are typically the people that are running those channels. They, and I'm not going to name any of them here. I will absolutely not give them any kind of publicity whatsoever, because negative publicity is still publicity. People will say, oh, I'm going to go check them out just to see how stupid they are and fill their pockets with more money. I don't even give them that time of day,
Right. Marc, I'm just going to jump in before you disappear, Mr. Curious Unknown. I've got Mr. Curious Unknown in the chat. Thank you for coming along and joining us. And if you can just hang fire there a few minutes, Mr. Curious Unknown, I'd like to ask Marc a question touching on something that you've been looking at in your videos. Now, Mr. Curious Unknown has been filming the sunsets and seems to be taking particular interest in the color of the sky. We're seeing the red sky, and a lot of people, not just Mr. Curious Unknown, but a lot of other people think that there is something strange and unusual and maybe something very wrong about seeing a red sky at night. And one thing that I've pointed out is that even back in biblical times, with the account of Jesus talking to his disciples and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, there's an account in Matthew 16 where the Pharisees and Sadducees approached him asking for a sign, and Jesus is written as responding to them that how is it that you can predict the weather based on the red sky at night or red sky in the morning, but you can't tell the signs of the times. Now, my point in mentioning that is that, of course, that was written approximately 2,000 years ago. So, you know, red skies, even back then when that was written, is there anything unusual or wrong about seeing red skies now?
You know, the red sky commentary was actually probably, this is not just my feeling based on, you know, seeing and hearing this saying ever since I was a kid, and everyone's in chat is saying it and they recognize it. But a red sky at night means something is showing you the red light, and usually that's clouds. And if it means, if you see clouds, you know, at night, it means that, well, maybe it's the front is going to be coming through overnight. Okay. But if you see the red clouds in the morning, it means the clouds may be approaching in the morning and thus bringing a storm front with them. So, you know, I think that's what it is, right? You know, red sky at morning, sailor take morning or whatever, right? Well, obviously, the other thing that happens is whenever the sun is obscured by clouds, we tend to see the winds shift on the earth, and we actually see a lot of changes to the winds, and they can become quite brusque, you know, quite brisk winds on a cloudy day. On a sunny day, the winds may not actually be so high, and that's just a differential heating of the ground and radiation that's reflecting infrared radiation reflecting back from the ground. If there's not as much, then sometimes there's a front with a high or a low, and a high or low next to each other can cause wind changes. We see it all the time as fronts come in. So it's probably related to weather fronts, in fact. That's kind of my read on it. But there's nothing wrong with seeing red sky at night. Okay, red sky at night is actually expected. Okay, why do you think the sun looks red in a nice sunset? Notice also that in a sunset that you see through say a large forest fire, the sun can be crimson. I mean, and that has nothing to do with fire of the fire from the forest fire. It has something to do, though, with the particles in the air and the way light is being scattered and the way it's being removed from the spectrum, the way light is being removed from the spectrum as it comes to you. Keep in mind, the Earth is curved. I better not flat. Sorry, the Earth is curved. So when you look in the distance, okay, when the sun is setting out here, way back up here on the Earth, okay, we actually see through more light. And when the sun is near the horizon, and when we see it through more light, that means that more of that blue scattering takes place, that Rayleigh scattering, and thus it looks redder. And so that's why the sun gets progressively redder as it gets nearer to the horizon. Every sunset is more red than noonday sun. And you can't say that's not factually true unless you have to invoke things like forest fires and other strange atmospherics.
Right. Now, even when we have a nice clear sky, there's another phenomena that we can see, which is called Belt of Venus. Would you like to explain Belt of Venus, Mark?
Belt of Venus? You're talking about when you actually see Venus in the sky, or are you talking about
that red coloring that you see? You've got the red and the blue banding.
Yeah. Sure.
Yep.
Sorry.
And so you got that belt that shifts up from the horizon as the sun is setting down on the opposite horizon.
Yeah. Believe it or not, I've never heard of it called Belt of Venus, believe it or not, in all my years. But I know what you're talking about. You're actually talking about the Earth's own shadow. Okay? Because when the sun sets, we have this curved surface of the Earth, but when the sun goes behind it, the light is shooting across in a straight line. And when it goes across the curve of the Earth, it actually shoots out into space. And we actually see projected on the atmosphere the shadow of the Earth itself, which, by the way, I wrote an article for the Huffington Post as I write for them. And on my article for the Huffington Post, where I talk about, it was titled "The Earth is Flat." Okay. And of course, the whole article was about why it really isn't. And I used the Belt of Venus, so to speak, as a reason why it's a proof that the Earth is not flat. Because you would never see that effect if the sun just receded from us, like in a flat Earth, for instance, and approached us like in a flat Earth. You'd never see that. And that's something that I use as an example about, that's right there, that defeats it. The other thing that I use as an example, and I don't want to go down the flat Earth path too much, but I will only if that comes up. But is the fact that the angular diameter of the sun, how big it looks on the horizon and how big it looks when it's overhead, doesn't change. When the sun rises, and rising and setting is a whole other thing, right? I mean, when the sun rises, it's the same angular diameter as when it's overhead and then when it's down on the other horizon. Now, in the flat Earth situation, the sun should be tiny. As it approaches, it should be getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it's go over us and then get smaller and smaller and smaller as it goes away. So it should approach and get bigger and then get smaller as it recedes from us, taking on its flat Earth rotation or whatever it does. So because it doesn't, that's a problem. See, so that's another proof that the Earth is round. So that goes on and on. But in your Belt of Venus question, it's a shadow.
Right. Okay. And just picking up on the point that you're making about the angular size of the sun, that's something I've done a series of videos on my channel. Check out my playlists, my Flat Earth Debunked playlists. I've also got another playlist specifically looking at the angular diameter of the sun as it crosses the sky. And Wolfie6020 on YouTube has also been doing some excellent videos looking at the angular size of the sun, where he's tracked it right across the sky during the day, and we see that there is no change whatsoever in the angular size of the sun.
Right. And when the sun rises, okay, it comes up above the horizon. In a flat Earth scenario, that's impossible, and it's a flat Earth scenario that it's not. Okay, it would never set, it would never rise. It would just go away and get smaller as it gets farther away. You know, that's not what we see. And the other thing too, another thing that I might have mentioned in my article is, you know, again, this is just an aside from our main topic, I realize, but I talked about at midnight in the John Zach Memorial Observatory for Sky Tour live stream, I shot an image right at midnight of the Lagoon Nebula, or was it the M16? It might have been you know, the Pillars of Creation, basically. And when I shot the image and looked at it, I had a little satellite going through, and you saw a little dash of light that corresponded to the actual length of the exposure. And I said, "Oh, cool, a satellite." And then when I later wrote the article, I remembered that image, and I said, "Hey, in the flat Earth scenario, we could never see that, because satellites would never be illuminated at midnight, because the sun is a quote-unquote spotlight in the flat Earth scenario. So you could never illuminate a midnight satellite." And then people would say, "Well, how could you illuminate a midnight satellite anyway?" Well, the track on it was that long. Okay, if it went all the way through the whole frame, you know, in other words, it was tiny. If it went all the way through the frame, that would have meant it's a low Earth orbit satellite. But we can't see those because the sun was set for those. For a satellite that's farther out in its orbit, okay, the Earth is getting smaller and smaller and smaller because it's out like 12,000 miles or 22,000 miles, or, you know, just, you know, somewhere between 12 and, you know, 15 is probably what this was. And so it made a very short line because it doesn't have to move as fast. And if it's that sort of line, then that means that it's far enough out so that the sun was still up for that satellite. So you can see it. And of course you need a telescope, you know, because it's not that bright. But anyway, and I've got, gosh, these dozens. I didn't even look on YouTube. I didn't look for any kind of stuff for this article. I just thought, okay, I'm just going to use my science that I know. I will come up with all the reasons why the Earth is round, for instance. And I came up with all my own, and it just sort of snowballed. I had to leave some out, in matter of fact.
Right.
So,
okay. Now, I just want to return to the question I was asking earlier too about the total solar eclipse that was seen across the US. We talked about if there was a brown dwarf within the solar system that would show up in infrared and so on. But what I was really getting at was the timings of the eclipse. So, you know, if you're at a particular point across the path of totality, the time when you would expect the eclipse to start, the time when totality should commence, and when totality should finish, and for the partial part of the eclipse to finish as well. And also the points either side where they were not in totality or in the path of totality, the amount of the sun that we would see. Now, to my mind, if there were brown dwarfs or even a single brown dwarf within our inner solar system, I would imagine that would severely perturb the orbit of the Earth and the Moon, and that this would affect the timings of the eclipse. In fact, it could completely throw it out. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, I think that's true, and I'm sorry if I missed that point you were trying to make earlier, and I kind of wandered down another path. But let's consider that if there was a brown dwarf here in our solar system somewhere, let's just say it was here, then it has to be in orbit of something. Now, if it's orbiting the sun in some way that is sympathetic to the Earth or whatever, which is means it has to be at the distance of the Earth at a minimum to orbit at the same speed as the Earth. Otherwise, it's going to go slower, and means we'll see it, or it has to go faster, and we'll see it. Because we don't, let's just say it's directly on the opposite side of the sun in our orbit. Just to say. Now, as we go around the sun, and as the moon goes around the Earth, the summed total gravity from the sun and this brown dwarf will affect the timings for the eclipse. They would affect them. But the fact is that they don't affect anything. We did this based on the gravity of the sun alone, which we know from its mass. And this tells us fundamental properties of the eclipse and fundamental statistics, fundamental timings. The timings weren't off. The timings were perfect. There was no perturbations noticed. Now, if this is in orbit, then, especially at the distance of the Earth, then the orbit of Mars would have been affected, but Mars is just perfectly regular. Mars doesn't slow down and speed up and slow down and speed up, okay? It's out farther, remember? And neither does Jupiter, and neither does Saturn, none of the other planets, and especially Mercury doesn't. Okay, Mercury and Venus, they don't change. They stay the same. Their orbital rotation, their orbital period, the time it takes for them to go around the sun, is locked steady. There's no unexplainable variations that would be expected if there's an object on the other side of the sun that's massive, more massive than Jupiter by 80 times. In fact, something like that might very well have dislodged Venus and Mercury potentially from their orbits long term and changed Mars' orbit long term. Now, for the Sky Tour live stream, I've done only one of these sessions so far, but I use this really cool orbital simulator that anyone can get. It's called Universe Sandbox 2. And I can put in a brown dwarf on the exact opposite side of the sun as the Earth, and then watch it all unfold and see what would happen to our solar system. So maybe I will, and see what we get.
Yeah. I've seen a few people do that. I think Astronomy Live has done that as well. I've also just played a basic little gravity demonstrator, which sort of showed us the sort of chaos that would result in a stable solar system by introducing a brown dwarf or large mass.
One thing you notice is that it doesn't take much
it doesn't take
really mess up our solar system.
Yeah,
because
and the other thing that we saw with that too was the effect of the barycenter of the sun, which you described earlier. The sun actually does a little wobble. You know, we all sort of imagine that the sun is fixed at the center of our solar system, but in fact it is doing a little wobble because of the gravitational pull, particularly of Jupiter being so massive.
Right, and all some of the other planets. Now, and in this last argument I just was talking about with this, supposing we had a brown dwarf at the orbit of the Earth diameter, away a radius of the Earth diameter from the sun, exactly opposite us, then we would have noticed the obvious, and that is that the sun itself would have started barycentric motion. And it hasn't. It's continuing the mild perturbations. By the way, these mild perturbations all happen within the diameter of the sun itself for the most part. Okay? Because of all the planets. Because the sun is massive. So a brown dwarf, we might also expect to see something that happens within the mass, within the diameter of the sun. All the motion of the sun would be within its own diameter, perhaps. But we don't see anything like that. There's nothing unexplained. So there really aren't any brown dwarfs. Now, how can this theoretical physicist say these things and not know this? I can't believe that's true. I think there has to be more in play. I think, I'd like to believe that she doesn't. She's not in full control of the narrative that goes out. I'd like to believe that what she says is correct, but that it's misinterpreted and put out there wrongly, saying that she said it this way, you know, editing or whatever. But I've heard her say, the sun doesn't produce green light. I mean, specifically. And I was like, oh man, why do you say these things? Those are so easily disproved. That's so easily disproven. It's like, you know, it's embarrassing. I feel embarrassed for her, you know, and I gotta say, I just don't understand how she could say this stuff. I just don't get it.
Right. Okay. Well, once again, if Dr. Claudia Albers would like to join us for a polite and respectful discussion about her claims, and she can put forward her arguments, and we will certainly hear her out and not talk over her or be rude or anything like that. Just try and have a professional discussion. I remember the very first hangout that I did with Scott Cohn. And at the end of that hangout, he thanked us very much, and he said that it was very nice. You know, it was a nice change to have a discussion, as he said, with grown-assed men instead of acting like thugs. And he said that he would like to do it again. And, of course, we know how that all turned out in the end. But the point was, it was a respectful discussion, which we thought that we had all achieved something very good. And if Dr. Claudia Albers would like to join me for a hangout like that, and by the way, Claudia, that hangout is still on my YouTube channel. If you would like to see how respectful I am, even as I was to Scott, please go and listen to that hangout. And you can expect that I would be just as polite and respectful with you. So we're just coming up to the hour here, so I'm going to wind this down in just a moment. Keith, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Oh, not necessarily, but I will ask Mark this one thing just to make it perfectly clear for anybody watching that is kind of on the fence of a Nibiru or Planet X. Mark, what would you say if somebody comes up to you and just says, you know, is there a Nibiru or Planet X in our solar system, or is there one that's going to affect us soon, being the next, whether it be months, years, in their lifetime? What would your answer be to them?
My answer would be simply the following. I'd say, based on all evidence, all astronomical evidence, all planetary measurements, all gravitational calculations based on the gravity of the known objects in our solar system, there is no reasonably large unaccounted for gravity, meaning that the only unaccounted for gravitational perturbation is out in the Kuiper belt, where the largest possible perturber is about the size of the Earth and no larger. That's the factual data. So you have to let people just gel with that and let them think it through and let them say it over and over in their heads until they understand it. Because
so it wouldn't just be a simple no.
Well, but see, that's the thing. When you say simply no, then they're still free to make their arguments. Mm-hmm. If you explain, and this is why and Keith will accuse me of this sometimes, you know, going on and just blathering on, which I will do, I admit. Okay, like now, but if you just say no, then they're free to continue their arguments because they can just say, well, he said no and I don't believe him, and then they move on. But they don't know why I don't believe him, so I have to explain why I don't believe him.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, you always have to qualify and give reasons for a conclusion,
especially to this crowd.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, now you know why we have Mark on so much, because he does put a lot of things in layman's terms, because people that aren't too bright, like myself, can actually understand. and we like to help educate people with actual science of it. Which is why we have a pretty good working relationship with Mark, and he comes on a lot of the time, and basically just takes a lot of people's questions in chat and tries to answer them the best he can. So I want to thank you for that, actually.
Well, you know what? I wouldn't have done any of this without you guys, because Keith, if you didn't push me, and Bill, New York Skywatcher, didn't push me, I probably wouldn't have done this, because I wouldn't have actually known what kind of reach it might have had and how effective it could be as a teaching tool. And that's all I'm about. I mean, I'm about, trying to acquaint people with science, because we need science. Now, I also want to say that, P&K space imaging, when I'm just doing nothing, or I'm in the middle of things and I really want something else to occupy my other eye, I have two eyes. I will put on P&K space imaging, and then, Keith puts on this great music, and you can watch things. And sometimes, a number of times actually, you'll see a little thing go across the moon. Well, what was that? Probably a satellite, but we don't know. Could be an unidentified flying object. And as the Mutual UFO Network's chief photo and video analyst, that always makes me go, ooh, look at that. So that's pretty cool. So you never know what you're going to see. And I really like that. And P&K really delivers. I just got to say that. So.
Right. Thank you. And on that, I'm just going to present to everyone again the screen share of Sky Tour live stream with Marc D'Antonio. Do check that out. I'll put a link in the description area underneath this video and in the first pinned comment. So some great videos there. And also, of course, we've got, let me find my, I'm juggling two mouses here. It's confusing. Okay, and we've got P&K Space Imaging, and we've got Keith with us right now. So do check those two channels out.
And not left to be unsaid, Dave. We really got to thank you for what you do as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yep. Do check out my Facebook discussion page, Voices of Reason to Explain X or Vortex. And also I have my Dazza the Cameraman Facebook page as well. So thank you once again. I've been a member of
Vortex for a long time, Dave. It's wonderful.
Awesome. Great. So thank you once again to Keith and Marc, and to everybody in the chat and everybody listening and watching the video. It's been a very interesting hangout. And again, Dr. Claudia Albers, if you would like to join me for a respectful discussion and join Marc as well, would be pleased to host you for a hangout. So this is Dazza the Cameraman, and thank you for watching.
Yep. Thanks.